everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour, your weekly dose of inspiration, creativity, and connection. Each week, we welcome a new guest who shares fresh ideas, helpful tips, and encourages us to try something new in our photography. If you'd like to stay in the loop, sign up for our newsletter at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. Tonight's guest is Cecil Holmes. Cecil is an outdoor photographer whose work focuses on landscape and wildlife photography. As a photography instructor, he leads in-the-field workshops to some of the most beautiful, photography-rich locations in the world. Entirely self-taught, Cecil has built his creative voice through thousands of early mornings, sleepless nights, and hours spent fine-tuning his images at the keyboard. He brings not only technical know-how, but also genuine storytelling and a deep sense of purpose to every frame and every student he mentors. Cecil is a brand ambassador for Tamron, Siri USA, and f-stop gear. You can connect with Cecil through his website at cecilsphotos.com. And if you're on Instagram, look for him at Cecil's Photos. In tonight's presentation, Photographing Alaska Brown Bears, Cecil will share his tips, techniques, challenges, and the ethics of photographing these iconic animals and the fragile ecosystems they call home. Cecil, welcome to the Happiness Hour.
Hey, thanks for having me. You made me sound like the smartest guy in Alabama.
No, I don't know. John Sharp is very close to my heart. You can be the second one, so make sure you let him know that I defended him.
I will let him know for sure.
Well, so I might have skimmed over your bio. If there's something you want to add to it, please take advantage and fill in the gaps.
I think you did a pretty good job.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to let you have the screen and you can do your thing.
I think when Linda reached out, we had kind of tried to nail down a topic and we wanted something a little more specific than just a general wildlife topic. And I think at the time you reached out, I had just returned from Alaska. So I had a fresh batch of images that I could talk about. So we just decided we'd nail the topic down to, the photographs that I've made over the last several years, making these visits to the bears in Alaska. So this is me. This is my website, Instagram, email, anything. So like anyone else that attends a workshop with me, if you ever have any questions, you can feel free to reach out via email or social media or any of those things. And I'll just give you a little bit more about my background. I know Linda covered a lot of it, but I will kind of give you a brief story of how I got into photography. And the short answer was we had children, but the longer answer is one of our younger sons started playing football at a very young age. And I was certain we were going to need high quality photos to send to Coach Saban for the recruitment process. So at the time, I invested in a Canon body and a 70 to 200 2.8 lens. And I took Pee Wee football pictures on the sidelines for 3 or 4 years. And before that, I was kind of an avid hunter sportsman. So I was like, I could do wildlife photography or I could do sports photography. And then I went to B&H website and I was like, man, these 600 millimeter lenses are like $13,000. I can never do either one of these genres of photography. Then, so I got into landscape photography. I don't know if Linda mentioned David or not, but David is my business partner. We actually run Nature in Focus workshops together. And I actually took a workshop that David was hosting back in 2007, I think it was.
Yeah, I didn't mention him, but let's say his last name so people are going, who's David?
So I think he has trouble saying his last name, but his name is David Akubian.
Mm-hmm.
He's of Armenian descent. So Yeah, I took a workshop with David in the Smokies on total accident. I just Googled, workshops in the Smokies, and it actually came up with another guy's name who I don't even remember, but he was helping David with the workshop. And I was of the mindset I went in thinking, hey, we're going to photograph a lot of bears and deers and, all these wildlife, coyotes. And then, like 12 hours the first day, all we did was waterfalls. And I told my wife, because that was one of the only ones that my wife had went on with me. Her and the kids did the Gatlinburg thing while I went and photographed. And when I got back, I was like, there's only so many waterfalls you can photograph in one day. And then after that, it turns out that's kind of my favorite thing to do now is landscapes and waterfalls. So he might have ruined me, but um, we kind of touched on this. If you're interested, you can scan the QR code and check out some of the workshops we offer. We generally do the Tetons quite regularly. We do a Tetons in the winter and in the spring, and then usually doing Iceland. We just got back from Iceland actually at the first part of July. So we were over there doing a lot of birds and mostly puffins, but it was a kind of a bird focused trip. But kind of what we're going to talk about for the Alaska thing is, how to get there, what kind of equipment I think works best, camera settings, why the bears are there, and the question we always get is how close do you get to these things? And spoiler alert, the answer is really close. But so just to get there, and I'll focus more on the lake that we like to go to. But to get there, we're going to fly into Anchorage and then drive down. But you'll see we usually base everything out of Kenai, so you can see by this map. You could drive down to Kenai, which is what we usually do. Um, like David and I will drive to Kenai, and then we'll pick participants up and have them fly to Kenai. It's about a 30-minute flight on one of these little prop planes. I think there's a couple of different airlines that make the Anchorage to Kenai flight. But usually you'll fly into the international airport in Anchorage and then catch a little puddle jumper over to the regional airport in Kenai. And the lake we like to go photograph the bears is called Crescent Lake. And you can kind of see from this Kenai Peninsula, Crescent Lake is the little checkerboard here. And then on the right side, you can kind of see a blown up view of it. But you also can see there's no roads going into Crescent Lake. So the only way to get to Crescent Lake is by float plane. There's a couple of different outfitters that can get you out there. It's generally a 30-minute flight from the Kenai area over to Crescent Lake in a float plane. And I don't know if you guys have ever been on a float plane before, but I was kind of nervous the first time. I thought this is going to be rough and it's going to be uncomfortable, but it was a smoother flight than my Delta flight getting into Anchorage. But so Crescent Lake is actually located in Lake Clark National Park. And like I mentioned, there's no roads to get in there. There's no beaches really. So even even wheeled planes can't land there. You have a float plane. And then this is kind of the setup from the airport we leave at. We've probably flown in both of those planes, but you'll drive up to this airport, and I use the term airport pretty loosely. It's mostly just a boat dock where you go in and there's weight restrictions. So it's not that you can't fly over a certain weight. It's just they need to know weight so they can balance the plane and that kind of thing. So, you go in and weigh on a scale and then you weigh your camera gear and they kind of use that information to determine where you sit in the plane to keep everything balanced. But this is the airport we fly out from. This was pretty early morning one morning we got there. The flights to and from Crescent Lake are gorgeous in themselves. This was just a little cell phone image I took out the plane window of us flying over one of the glaciers. And then once you get to Crescent Lake, you land, you get in one of these little John boats, and this is one of the guides up front hanging over the bow of the boat. the guides will just take you around. They see that you can see the bears on the shoreline, and they just tool the boat around to where um, get the best shots of the bears. And these guys do this all day, every day, rain, snow, sleet, whatever. And they deal with a lot of photographers. So they know, you like the sun to your back, and they can get you in the best locations. But it's a good picture too I've got a few of these in here, but you can kind of see how close you get. Here's a mom with two cubs here just beyond the boat. You can kind of see one of the salmon right here next to one of the babies, and all kinds of salmon guts and carcasses in front of the other baby. But that's the gist of it. You take a little float plane to Crescent Lake. You hope it's not raining when you get there. You get out of the plane and you hop on one of these boats and you just go to where the bears are. This is a little panoramic image I made at Crescent Lake. There's actually a lodge over here to the far right where you can stay if you're wealthy or have more money than I have. But they tool guests in and out on float planes here, and I put this little panorama together to give you an idea of the landscape around Crescent Lake. As you know, it's very mountainous and gives you kind of a sense of scale with the float plane there in the foreground in front of the mountain. So gear that I use, I'm mostly using Sony gear. I have recently bought a Nikon Z8, so I do have that body, but most of my gear is going to be Sony related. I prefer the A1. I think it's probably one of the best cameras ever made. I'm sure the A1 Mark II is probably better, but it's also about $1,500 more expensive, which the A1 was already pretty expensive. And then Tamron lenses, I've probably got all of them for Sony mount, but for the trips to Crescent Lake, initially you think you want the longest lens possible, especially for wildlife. You want 500, 600 millimeter lens. And I would say that's a correct assumption, especially for most cases. But at Crescent Lake, you're able to get so close to the bears that sometimes 150, you can't back out enough to get a lot of the bear in the frame. So the newer lens has probably been out a year or two now is the 50 to 400. I really like that lens for Crescent Lake because backing out to 50 can give you a sense of some of the landscape, and and 400 is more than enough for this situation. Crescent Lake's a very unique situation in the fact that you can get so close to the bears safely with, we're in a boat with a professional guide, and they're not going to put you in any danger. And the bears also don't care. They're there to fatten up. They're there to eat salmon all day, every day, especially the time of year we go there. So late fall and September, they're just looking to fatten up before they hibernate. But I would suggest rain gear. I think I've made the trip to Crescent Lake about 6 times now, and I think it's not rained maybe once or twice. So rain gear for your camera and you, preferably. As far as settings go, this is kind of a general wildlife, kind of what I recommend as a starting point for most wildlife. But I shoot in manual mode. You can do it in any mode you want. You just have to kind of realize shutter speed is the most important with wildlife. So we're trying to get a faster shutter speed. And just by the way that the exposure triangle works, that's going to mean we're going to probably be shooting at smaller apertures like f4, f8, somewhere in that range. If you're lucky enough to have a 2.8 lens, you could even do that. But I usually shoot all of my wildlife on auto ISO because it's just another setting I don't have to worry about when I'm in the field. And I've missed too many shots not using auto ISO that now I'm just a firm believer in using auto ISO for wildlife. And as far as like focus modes, continuous focus mode is what you want to be in. And if you have one of those new mirrorless cameras that does tracking, makes it even easier. We have conversations all the time about, do you remember when we used to do birds when there was no tracking, how hard it was? It's like, man, the number of throwaways that we used to have versus now with the eye tracking for birds and stuff. But like I said, you can shoot any mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, any of those will work as long as you pay attention to your shutter speed. And typically, I like to tell people for wildlife, you know, a thousandth of a second for a shutter speed, auto ISO, and then start somewhere around f8 and see how that works. You may not have enough light for f8. You may have enough, depends. And we want to make sure we turn VC, IS, VR, whatever we're calling it on our lens or camera body. Because I wouldn't recommend a tripod at all in the boats for Crescent Lake. You could get away with a monopod, but it generally just gets in the way more than it helps. So I would just handhold, turn on my VR, my IBIS, and then as far as focusing, just we want to make sure we try to focus on the bear's eyes. Any kind of wildlife we're shooting, if it's a bird or a bison, anything, we want to make sure the eyes, the sharpest point of the image. So always focus on the eyes. And then if you have a camera that will shoot a fast drive speed, like 10 frames a second, 15 frames a second, I would say for the bears, just put it on as fast as she'll go. Just let her eat. So the reason we go to Crescent Lake, especially in September, is because that's where the bears are. I'm kind of a lazy wildlife photographer. I don't want to sit in the woods for hours and wait on something to show up. I'd rather just go to where the animals are. And that's exactly the way Crescent Lake works, is that the bears are there in droves and they're there for the sockeye salmon. They're just stocking up. And the salmon all swim up into the lake. The lake is connected to a Crescent River, and they all swim up the river upstream and they spawn in Crescent Lake. And I looked this up earlier today, but they said the 20-year average for numbers of salmon in Crescent Lake are about 100,000 fish. And they said there's been as many as 200,000 salmon recorded by Alaska DNR in the lake. And that lake's about 6 miles long. So you can kind of figure there's a lot of salmon. And I'll show you in some pictures like this. All these little red streaks are salmon. This is just right outside our boat. This might have even been a cell phone picture, but just the numbers of fish here. If you're a fisherman at all, you're just like, wow, hey, give me a rod. I don't see how I could go wrong. And you can see in this picture all the little red streaks around this bear salmon. Again, here with all the red streaks, it's just salmon. And they're just typically they come out of the woods, they come down to the shore, and they just hunt these shallow waters. And you'll learn the behaviors of the bears, how different each one of them are. And that's a lot of getting the good shots, is learning the behavior. And you can even see in this picture all the salmon right here in the foreground of this picture. But people always ask, how close do you get? Well, we get pretty close, but we're in a boat and we have a professional guide. So we're not putting any pressure on the bears. They're still hunting and going on their day. Like, they don't care. They have so little human interaction out there because of it being such a remote location. And the guides see these bears every day. So they know the bears by name, and they know their behaviors and know that they're not going to put us in any danger. But here's a couple of pictures of. So the way this works is we usually take a group of about 6 with us, and then David gets 3 in his boat, and I'll get 3 in my boat. So all the pictures I have are David and his group in their boat, but they're just photographing, this bear on the point here, and then this bear just. A lot of times you'll just anchor and sit in the shallow waters and let the bears walk around you and hunt around you. So this is what's happening: is this bear's just walking the shoreline, looking for fish. And this is one of my favorites because they're pretty close here. I'd say the front of this boat's probably 10 feet from this bear, but the guide's sacked out in the back of the boat. He has no care in the world that this bear is going to do anything. So I always think it's funny that this is probably the closest they ever got to a bear, and the guy's just passed out in the back of the boat. So we're going to look at a bunch of pictures, and we're going to see, kind of why I like going here, and we'll talk through some of these. But there's different places in Alaska to go photograph the bears in different times of year. So if you go now, June, July, you usually go to the mud flats and photograph the brand new baby cubs that are digging for clams and that kind of thing. But I just really love seeing these bears catch these bright red sockeye salmon. So I just keep coming back to Crescent Lake for that reason. But and you can see in this photo, there's a lot of bugs. So you deal with the mosquitoes and the flies. But yeah, it's just an adult black bear who's just caught a salmon, ripped it in half. And this is now earlier when I said I usually recommend people start at about 1,000th of a second for shutter speed. For the bears, depending upon what you want to do, I may go up to about 3,000th of a second or maybe higher, depending upon how much light I have. But I will let auto ISO kind of compensate for that because a lot of times for people, this trip to Crescent Lake may be a once in a lifetime trip. And I would rather come back with a noisy photo than an out of focus or a blurry photo. So I'd rather shoot it. And a lot of these are high ISO. So I'd rather shoot it at, ISO 10,000 or 12,000 and have a sharp image than come back and say, oh, wish I would have done something different and had a better image. So a lot of these are high ISO images, and I just clean them up with, the new denoise in Lightroom or even Topaz Photo AI does a great job. But these bears are just catching fish left and right, and not small fish. I mean, this guy here is probably 18 inches long, this fish, or maybe longer. But this particular day, we had some good light. You can see he's got a little bit of sunlight hitting him in the face. So this one is a little bit cleaner than the other ones. But I just love, the look on these sockeye salmon's face. They know they've been had, and there's nothing they can do about it. But and the bears, a lot of these fish, this is a fish like if you caught it, you'd be pretty proud of that one. But just like the high shutter speeds here with will capture all these drops. They usually catch this thing and then they'll come up and shake a time or two, and you can capture all that action and just freeze these water drops with a fast shutter speed. Typically for these guys fishing, I'm going to be around 2,000th or 2,500th. And then this is the business of what goes on here. Once they catch a salmon, you get to see these are all eggs that are falling out. That's kind of what they're there for, is the eggs have the most protein, but they eat every bit of the fish. Um, and I like this image because you can see the claws and the business end of what's going on. And I hope we don't fly through the images too quick, and this is an adult, and this is probably a second year cub that was with mom. And this happens quite a bit. You'll see mom catch a fish, and either mom takes it over to the cubs or the cub shows up like, hey, give me that fish. So this is what's happening here. Mom's just caught a fish, and the cub's like, hey, that's mine. You need to give it to me.
Cecil, can you confirm this is did you say it was a black bear?
They're called Alaskan brown bears.
Okay.
They could be called grizzlies. I think they're a subgenre of the grizzly bear. I think the only difference between these and grizzlies are the location that they live. So if they're more toward the coast, they call them grizzlies, and if they're more inland like this, they're Alaska brown bears.
Okay, thank you.
But
So coastal brown bears, that's what Jan's thinking they're called.
I think that would probably work. I
Okay.
think deep down they're grizzly bears. It's just that they're not they're just a subgenre type of grizzlies. They're definitely big like grizzlies. They have the hump like grizzlies and the claws like grizzlies. So they're closely related to grizzlies for sure.
Okay, thank you.
So this is mom and a cub. This was a first year cub, but the cubs are typically born, June, July, and when we're there in September, the cubs have have grown a little bit, so they're not the tiny little cubs that everyone thinks are so adorable, but they're still cute and adorable. They've just put on a little weight. And here you can see again all these little specks in the water are just salmon. This is the reflection of what's left of this one that the baby's got, but mom's caught a fish. And I don't remember, this mom may have had more than one cub. We saw several moms with two and three cubs this particular year when we were there. Um, but yeah, mom's caught the fish, and either the other cubs or mom has taken her share, and this is what the cubs left with. Here's another one. Mom's caught the salmon. Baby usually sits on the shore and waits for mom to bring the fish over. There are some spunky cubs that will get out in the water, and I've got a few images to share with you of those guys. But another one that I just really love because you can see the claws and how vicious these things could be. I'm glad it's the sockeye salmon and not my leg. And this bear, I was telling you earlier about the behaviors you learn of the bears. And of course, we typically, if we do a trip, we take a workshop group out to Crescent Lake twice. So if we do back-to-back workshops, we may be out there 4 times in a 2-week period. So we see the same bears a lot. David and I will. And this particular bear was very interesting. The mom would, we called her Scuba because she would go underwater, like snorkeling underwater, and snatch a fish out from underwater and bring it up. Where a lot of these bears are just running through the shallows and pouncing on bears. She was in 7, 8 feet of water and just diving down to catch a bear or catch a fish. And once she caught this one, the cubs were just fighting over who's going to get the largest portion of it. Here's another one where we had a little bit of sunlight. Sunlight's always welcome because, like I say, most of the time it's raining. I think I do prefer the overcast days just because the sunlight can get harsh sometimes. But it's always nice to shoot at something less than 8 or 10,000 ISO. So the sun's always welcome. Again, you see the eggs coming out where the bear's just kind of chunked into this fish, and you can see those teeth that are dug in there. Here's another situation where mom's caught the fish. Cubs just waiting for her to bring it over. These are, and these interactive moments I think are just great to capture, with mom and cubs. So these shots, the shots, a shot I really wanted to get the first couple of times I went was the bears leaping into the water. And I quickly learned that takes a lot of practice, because if you wait and hold your shutter button down after you see the bear jumping, you've already missed the shot. So you have to learn a little bit of the bear's behavior, and each bear is a little different. They have different personalities, just like we do. But a lot of times, the key is you'll see the bear freeze, and you'll just see its head start bobbing around looking. And once you see that head start bobbing, it's just trying to find a fish to hone in on. And once you see the head start bobbing, you just have to hold the button down and wait, because if you wait till after you see the bear jumping, you've already missed the leaping shot. But this one, not necessarily leaping. This one's just running through the shallows. And a lot of times you get these kind of shots of bears that aren't necessarily great fishermen, because they run through the shallows, miss the fish, then they run again and miss the fish, and you don't get the fish in the mouth shot, but you get a lot of these cool running through the shallow shots. Now this shot with the bear leaping into the camera, just a lot of luck has to be on your side. You got to have the boat lined up properly. You got to have the bear facing you, and then you got to have learned that behavior of the particular bear to know when it's about to pounce. And this is going to be a shot I would shoot at a shutter speed of like 3,000th or 3,500th of a second, really fast, just to capture this moment. And I'm going to shoot this at 15 or 20 frames a second on my drive mode, just to make sure I get the shot. And this one I think is always kind of interesting. You can see a little bit of a pink from the salmon just below the water right in front of the bear. Here's another one. You just get lucky sometimes with the alignment of the bears, and this guy just happened to be leaping like right at us. So I was ready. It takes a lot of practice. I think the first time everybody goes, they always come away with shots they're happy with, but they're always like, I wish I would have done this different, or I wish I would have done this different. So if you ever get the opportunity to go, I would say go at least twice if you can, because the first time you're going to be happy with your shots, but you're going to say, "Oh, now I know what to look for. Now I know what happens right before this." This is just another one of the bears leaping. This you can see here, like we're not lined up in front of it, but I still think it's a pretty cool shot because of the side angle, and you can see, these claws and paws curled up underneath the bear's chest. You still get all this water droplet action from fast shutter speed. And these are kind of like, I just like to call these bear portraits. They're not doing anything particularly interesting, and you can lower your shutter speed for these. You could go back to like a thousandth of a second for these kind of shots. But this bear was that bear I was telling you about that would dive. So this bear was just going under the water looking for fish, and when it came up without a fish, he would constantly get this water dropping off of the bear's coat, which I thought was really cool. And you can tell the water in Crescent Lake, it's all glacier runoff, so it's just this really cool turquoise blue. This one is a shot. We had gone further down the lake and into the mouth of the river, and there the bears act a little different than they do in the lake. They're not running around the shallows and trying to catch fish like they are up in the lake. They're mostly looking for floaters. So when the salmon spawn, they usually die after they spawn, and they'll just float around. And the bears in the river just wait for them to die, and they just go grab the floaters that are floating around the top of the water. But this one, mom was just had left the cub do her thing for a little while. Mom got a little bit too far away, and cub's running to catch back up. And I just thought this was a pretty cool composition with the cub in the background splashing back to catch up with mom. Here's a little cub, probably cub of the year. This dude was super curious, so he swam almost right up to the boat, and he's just checking us out. He didn't have a care in the world. He was like, "What are these people doing here?" And this was just a really cool moment. That it's not many places on the planet where you can go and photograph a cub like this close without worrying about where mom's at, or where am I going to get attacked from. But in the boat, I'm sure if mom wanted to, she could probably climb in that boat and kill us all. But in the boat, you're pretty safe. And these bears are just there. They don't care about the humans. They're just there to eat the fish. In fact, we had a guide one year who he was a great guide, and he would cook in the boat while we were photographing. And he was cooking salmon he brought a little butane eye and a frying pan. He was frying salmon in the boat while the bears were fishing for salmon. And you could tell the bears were like, they were sniffing around, like, what is that smell? But, other than the smell, nothing else interested them. They never came up to the boat to look for anything. They, they got the smell. They probably were thinking, why cook it? Well, that's a waste of time. But another just bear portrait. You kind of can see more bugs here. This bear is probably just tried to catch a fish and missed. If I'm guessing, you can see some of the water droplets falling off. But the light was in a good position behind us, front lighting the bear. Here's another shot of like a mom. She's on the hunch. This is kind of the stance you'll see right before they do the leap. She's frozen, and she'll just start moving her head all around looking for salmon. And once you see the head moving, something's about to happen. But she's got her two cubs behind her. They're just hanging out. And then all of a sudden, a cub fight breaks out. So they were just back there waiting for salmon, and then one of them said something. the other one, you could see there's three cubs total back here, but the two front ones, they had a little sibling spat back there. Mom's still focused on the fish. She's not concerned about them. And then here's don't know if these are the same two or not, but another couple of cubs that are they're learning to survive in the wilderness, right? They're just playing, but this play behavior is actually teaching them life lessons on how to survive later. And I just love that you can see both of their facial expressions, and they, just and they, like I said, there's a lodge there. There's a lot of boats from the guide services. So this little stake in the ground is actually a tie down for like one of the float planes. This bear found it, and it was a toy at that point. This bear's trying to just push it left and right and dig it up out of the ground. Here's another shot where he's leaning on it the other way, and he's just having a ball. You see, this is probably a 2-year old cub, but man, look at those claws are vicious. And then another reason I like to take the wider lens, like the 50 to 400, is to do shots like this where you can include some of the area or the environment around them. You can include some of the mountains, and it gives you a sense of where these bears live. These bears typically stay up in the woods on this hill or this mountain, and they just come down to the lake for fish. And then once they get full, they're back up in the woods. And a lot of times you can see them coming because you just see trees shaking all the way down from the mountain to the shore. You never see the bear, you just see trees moving as they're walking their way down. But yeah, I like these wider angle shots, and the ability, having that 50 to 400 gives me the ability to back out a little and get some of these shots where you can include not only the bear but the mountains and the landscape around them. And going in September, it's about I say that probably middle of September is probably peak fall colors for them. So you do get a lot of the colors changing in the trees behind them. And then I threw a couple of these in here at the end because if you didn't hate gulls before you went on this bear trip, you certainly will before you leave, because they get in the way of a lot of things. Here's a couple of them running shots. And I think that's the last one, yeah. But yeah, so the gulls get in the way a lot, and you just have to deal with them because the gulls are there for the free meal.
That's great. That's probably my favorite story. Okay, so I've got two questions for you. Let's see. One was from Andy. In the photo where you said it was glacial runoff, his question was, do you adjust the color of the water? It's because it's so pretty. He was wondering if you did
No,
anything.
I, I'm I don't usually do anything. I might give the image a little bit of vibrance in Lightroom, but nothing. You don't have to do anything to get that color. The water looks that color.
Okay, so the second question was from Trish, and it was, do you talk about the bear behaviors with your group before you get out on the water?
Yep, we go over all of that, and then so we have to watch a safety video at the airport before we leave on the bear behavior and safety with the airplanes and all that stuff. And then the guides will give you a speech too once you get there. And depending upon your guide, they may even have some other things. Some of them will carry things to show you, like they have skulls and stuff to show you the difference in like a black bear and a brown bear or a grizzly bear and a brown. So you get a little education too along the way about the species and that kind of thing. But yeah, you're required to watch a bear safety video before you ever get on the plane.
Okay, that's not a bad idea. Valerie's got a question. It's about the bears, actually. Let's see. Do they feed like this all day long or just certain times a day?
Mostly all day long, they're trying to put on as much weight as possible right before they hibernate.
Yeah,
I forget the numbers. Gosh, they're consuming hundreds of pounds of salmon every day.
that's
And
a lot.
and and if you're a mom with three cubs, you've got to fish for you and the cubs.
Sure.
So that's a lot of fish catching.
Yeah, that's a lot of salmon that didn't make it. Okay, Jan's question is, how long is the workshop? And do you photograph anything other than bears? Like, for example, eagles?
Yep. So we usually do 5 or 6 days in Alaska, and the bears. So we'll do the bears twice on a workshop. So that's just 2 days, 2 half days of the workshop. So you do a 4 hour trip. So you got a 30-minute flight. You do 4 hours on the water and a 30-minute flight back. So when we're not doing bears, we usually take the group down to Homer, and we'll do a boat trip out of Homer, and we'll see a lot of otters. We do a lot of otter photos. You'll see all kinds of birds, eagles, all kinds of seabirds and that kind of thing. But yeah, we do a lot of different things. We actually do boat trips out of Homer. We do trips down the lake of like Skilac Lake or the Kenai River. We'll do float trips down the Kenai, photograph a lot of loons on the river. You'll see seals out there. There's all kinds of things to see, but we usually will do, uh, 4 or 5 guided trips along the workshop, and then we'll also do some scenic stuff when we're not doing the guided trips.
Okay. All right. I think I got everybody's question. If I didn't, y'all need to type faster here. All right. I'm gonna say, well, let me ask you this. Before I say thank you, and is there anything, when is your next workshop? I mean, how far in advance does one need to like schedule a book? Put down the
Um, well, our next workshop that Dave and I are doing together isn't until January, which is going to be in the Tetons.
Okay.
And being from the southeast, a lot of people get scared about Tetons in the winter just because of the weather. But I will tell you this, it gets cold temperature wise, but they don't have the humidity like we have.
Sure.
So to me, when it's like 0 degrees in the Tetons, it feels like it does here when it's about 30.
Yeah.
So
It's dry air. It's nice.
and then we also we drive you around, so you don't have to worry about driving in the snow or ice or anything. We handle all the driving. So that was one of the things that turned people off early on. They were like, "Oh, we don't want to drive in the snow." So we figured that out quickly and said, "I will just drive you around."
Jan slipped in another question. She wants to make sure she understands. Do you stay at the lodge at Crescent Lake?
Nope, nope, don't stay at the lodge. It's absurdly expensive to stay on Crescent Lake at that lodge. We usually stay in the town of Kenai or somewhere around Kenai, and then we'll fly out of a little airport in Kenai to go to Crescent Lake. So, like I said, it's about a 30-minute flight to get over there. And the
Okay.
flight itself is just amazing. You see all kinds of cool landscapes and glaciers and waterfalls. And
Yeah. The second part of her question, are the 2 days with the bears separated by several days, or do you going back to back?
it depends on when they can get us in, basically. But we try to do a morning and an afternoon. So we don't do the same time of day.
Okay.
So if we go on a morning with your group and the next trip will be in the afternoon, but it might be the next day and it might be 2 days later. It just depends on when the guides can get us in.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I don't see any other questions. This is the time of the show where I say thank you for coming and sharing what you know. And in particular, sharing your Wednesday night with us. If there's anything that you wanted to make sure that you got in, take a moment to do that. But I really appreciate you not blocking me and saying yes. And it was good to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for letting me come on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. All right. Next week, it's been like a wildlife month here at the Happiness Hour. But next week, Irene Sacalato will join us with her presentation, A Passion for Wildlife Photography. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.